Greetings from the realm of the unexplained. Join us at Paranormal M as we unravel the mysteries of the paranormal world. Hit that like button and never miss out on our spine-chilling narratives. Strange experience I can't get out of my head. I have this paranormal experience that happened to me about 2 to 3 years ago. I've never been able to shake it out of my mind. I started thinking about it again today and wanted to get some insight on people who know a thing or two about the paranormal. So now I'm here. I was at a PTO meeting at my old school. I was bored, and the only other kid there was an older girl that I'm not really friends with. So I decided to leave the cafeteria and wander around the school. Once I reached the second floor, I started walking down the hallway towards the library. Then I heard a voice. It sounded like a child's. It was coming from the library. It made some weird noise that went like, that's an abbreviation, but that's what they wrote. Really glad I was recording so I could capture that. I was a bit startled, but I was really curious as to what that noise could be. The library doors were locked and the lights were off. No one was in there, and nobody was even on that floor except a janitor way down another hallway. I started to walk towards the library in curiosity. I then saw an all-white hand slap the window from the inside. Really mad my camera was on me, so I didn't get that on that video. Does anybody have a clue what that thing in the library could have been? Shadow People Experience. I'm 29 years old, and I'm a quadriplegic. I'm wheelchair bound due to an accident when I was 14. This left me paralyzed with no feeling or movement below my nipples. After years of consideration to make my life easier and more stress-free, I decided to get a colostomy. Made the most sense for me to do to make, the ease of life easier. For this surgery, I would need to do 48 hours of a fast before the colonoscopy. And the next day, I'd have my colostomy. And I could still not really have any food up until that surgery. I roughly went 4 days without eating. Day of the surgery. Very thick, foggy weather. Besides my surgery getting pushed back 3 hours, the surgery went well, and when I awoke, it was conscious, and everything went as planned. I would need to be hospitalized that evening, and the next day, possibility maybe a third, depending on how the nurses felt, but that night, as my day winded down and my visitors would leave, I would spend the evening watching TV on my phone until I got tired enough to try to fall asleep. I can't feel that part of my body, so I wasn't in any pain, but they were giving me small doses of a pain medicine called Dilaudid, just to keep me comfortable and help me get some sleep. My room was dark with just the lights from my IV machine and the crack of the blinds from my window illuminating the room from the parking lot streetlights from the hospital. I would have some trouble sleeping that night, mostly feeling like I would sleep 5 or 10 minutes and then suddenly just awaken. But then I would quickly fall back asleep, just for the same process to happen again and again. This would go on until about 3 a.m. I would eventually fall asleep once again, but then I suddenly awoke, but this time it felt like I was awakened for a purpose, or I was being watched. The visit. When I woke up lying in my hospital bed, something out of my right peripheral caught my attention. I would turn my head to the right and see a very tall, and I mean at least 10 feet tall, like a silhouette sitting on the hospital chair next to my window. Sitting down, this figure was so tall its head was almost hitting the ceiling. I would close my eyes and reopen them as if to make my vision clear, as I didn't know what I was looking at. After doing that, The tall, dark figure was still sitting there, and it seemed like he was looking at me, although he had no eyes or facial features. Oddly enough, I wasn't scared, nor did I feel uncomfortable. Almost quite the opposite, as it almost seemed like it was there to comfort me. I would look at the figure and say, "Hello?" And in the fraction of a second, almost as if I had missed him making a move, he was standing at the side of my bed. He was towering over me, looking down. It's at this point when I almost skip time. At the next thing you know, I'm laying flat on my back, still in a room that's completely white with no walls. No source of light, but very well illuminated. It seemed like I was laying on a piece of maybe hard rock, something similar to granite. When I look up now, there's two black figures, both the same size with the same body structure. What was weird is I felt I knew, which one had taken me to this new place and what one I had not had any confrontation with as of yet. At this point, I'm still very calm and not scared. I don't feel any harm will be done to me, per se. And as I'm lying there, I turn to the first figure and ask him, "Is everything okay?" He responded with a simple yes, followed by a second figure saying to me, "We are just mending you." Then the first figure will pull a silver dome with bright shining lights beaming down over the top of my head. This is where I have my second lapse in time until this dome is pulled away from my face. Once I awaken, I turn to the first figure who I felt I had a better connection with, or possibly just felt like that's who I should be speaking to. I asked him, "What was the purpose of this?" He doesn't answer, but the second figure turns toward me and says, "It's that you have a new purpose." This is where my third lapse of time happens, and I'm floating through the foggy air from outside through my hospital window back into my bed. Almost as soon as I was back in my bed, I was asleep. I would then sleep until 8:30 in the morning, and immediately when I woke up, this is the first thing I thought about. It felt so real, nothing like any dream I've ever had, and I can recall every part of this experience. Immediately, I would Google the definition of mending, a word which I would almost likely never use in my life. Definition: to repair something that is broken or damaged, or return to health or heal. Improve an unpleasant situation. After that, I would call my wife and tell her the story of what I called being abducted by shadow people. Both of us are really confused on what the meaning of this was, but we both feel it was real and not a dream. I also don't believe it was a hallucination based on the pain medicine I was on, as it was such a low dose and I remember it so vividly. The figures. Both of them were very tall, at least 10 feet, and both were pitch black with no human features I could distinguish, other than the shape of their body, although I do remember seeing no fingers or nose or any facial features for that matter. It was more or less just a shadow. I don't necessarily know if they talked back to me or if I heard their voice telepathically, mainly because there was no mouth. As I stated before, they didn't scare me and really make me uncomfortable, and in fact almost felt like I was in a bliss of comfort when I was around them. For some reason, I do feel like the second figure was in charge, or the boss, mainly because he seemed to answer for the first figure certain questions, and it seemed like he was leading the process. As I stated before, I never saw them walk toward me or necessarily move other than turn their body. It almost seemed like the silver dome wasn't even pulled down over my head by an arm or anything. Both of their voices were different, but both very monotone. Aftermath. Since having this experience, I have not seen the shadow figures anymore, but the memory is still very strong and vivid in my mind, almost as if I'm, never going to forget it. At the time of writing this, it's now been a little over 2 months since it happened. My wife recommended I just post it on here to see if anybody else has had any similar situations, or maybe be able to make light of what it is that happened. I did tell my nurse later that day about my experience, and she just said that, well, that's creepy, that most people don't hallucinate off of that pain medicine, especially at the dose I was given. Overall, it wasn't a bad experience. I actually really feel good about it. And as I stated before, I was not scared or uncomfortable at any moment. What's the scariest experience you've ever had? I lost my father in 2021. He passed away at age 56. He worked at a factory where they made paint. Due to his field, he developed scar tissue in his lungs. He had pulmonary fibrosis. We fought for 5 years, but during COVID he got bronchitis and passed away. Shortly after his passing, I dreamed of my dad one time prior to this time. He was laying on his bed smiling with a thumbs up. When he appeared to me, he didn't say anything. It was more like a feeling that I knew it was him. He looked so young and he glowed. Not in a movie or cartoon way, but in an out-of-this-world kind of way. I ended up crying in my sleep and my mom woke me up. I was sobbing. After that time, I dreamed of him again about a year later. This time it was different. I remember my living room, and my dad had his lazy boy recliner in the corner of the living room, and that recliner was his sanctuary. He spent most of his time in that chair. I remember seeing my dad rocking in his chair with his oxygen tank right next to him. That's because of his pulmonary fibrosis. He has a very distinct cough. In my dream, my dad was weak and sick, and he was rocking back and forth and coughing as I got closer. And his cough got more exaggerated until it eventually turned into an evil, loud laugh. I also remember saying, "You're not my dad," and trying to wake up. Then I realized I was stuck. I had sleep paralysis. My mom was laying next to me, and it was really hard on her losing my dad, but for the first year, I moved in with her and slept with her because she hadn't slept alone in over 30 years. My mom felt somebody get on the bed, but obviously there was nothing there, so out of fear, she woke me up. When she did wake me up, she was terrified. She said she felt and saw the imprint of something climbing on the bed. Residual ghost. It's 2003. I'm a preteen in a small town in Southern America. In these times, there wasn't much to do but to watch Disney Channel and chat on our family desktop computer. Luckily, there was dial-up internet. If I close my eyes, I can still hear the... We all slept pretty early in those times, and I remember being in bed by 9 most nights. On this particular night, I remember the air feeling a bit thick. The best way I could describe it would be almost like a sense of urgency. So I remember rushing to my room to get to bed. Most nights, my younger sisters would sneak in bed with me, but this time I made sure to lock my door, got in bed and fell asleep, and the next thing I know, I'm being awoken by a party. The party I heard sounded like it was coming from our family room. That was connected to the hallway that leads to our rooms. I remember hearing multiple voices and music. I heard glasses and steps like dancing. Growing up, my dad enjoyed a good bar, but it wasn't uncommon that he got home around this time and put the TV on in the living room too loud. I was mad because I felt my dad was being inconsiderate, so I jumped out of bed and opened my door aggressively and fast. And I opened it to silence. Everything stopped. Lights were off, everyone in bed. Nothing out of place. Just silence. I quickly got my sisters and, we head to my room and go to bed. I'm originally from California. My entire family resides in Los Angeles. Unfortunately or fortunately, we moved when I was about 2 to a small town in Texas. So as I like to flex, I'm Cali-made, Texas-raised. Although some of my father's siblings moved in with us due to better job opportunities, we still made frequent visits and often spent a majority of our summers on the West Coast. It was always an adventure every time we went down to visit. Some of the most bizarre experiences in my young adult life were from my summers down in Cali. There's one memorable moment that's always stood out to me and my cousins. It's one of our staple memories that we all often discuss and now as adults try to figure out. One summer when I was about 11 or 12, me and my cousins spent most of the days outside my grandmother's house. She lived next to an apartment complex in Lawndale, California. Being bored, we always, the beginning of many great adventures, this happens. And on this particular afternoon, me and my cousins decided to play Charmed. It was a bunch of us girl cousins that played witches with powers, and our boy cousins would be the demons. Sounds silly, but it was like tag, but in teams and make-believe powers. As we played, we saw a little girl above looking at us. She had blonde, short, curly hair, and she was in a nightgown. She stared at us with this uneasy grin and what I can only describe as a loud stare. She was standing near a rail on the 3rd floor. I say a loud stare because when I got uncomfortable and broke eye contact, I looked back and all of my cousins were just glazing up at her, almost mesmerized. It's also important to note that I was the second oldest in this group of 12 to 6-year-olds. For some reason, it felt wrong, and I yelled out, "Hey!" They all looked at me. I knew something was wrong because my little cousins didn't speak or react. The apartment complex was open and exposed to the outside from my grandma's backyard. I could see the 2nd and 3rd floor and all the doors that lead to that apartment. When we turned around, the girl was on the 2nd floor closer to us. Me and my older cousin shared a look of despair. We knew something was off at the moment, but we didn't question how she moved so quickly. We didn't want to scare the kids. She still had the same stare and look on her face, and without breaking her grin, she almost asked if she could play with us. Me and my older cousin told her no, and we both, for some rude reason, cussed her out. I should also mention that I'm Mexican-American, and in our culture, we're taught to curse out the bad spirits. I think me and my older cousin knew something wasn't human about her. The energy felt heavy, and at this point, my younger cousin seemed frozen in fear. Immediately after we cussed her out, we had a blackout. They're pretty common in LA. It wasn't the first time we'd experienced a blackout. But what happened next was unexplainable. When we looked back at the young girl, she was walking on the utility pole electric wire. We could see her squared over almost like an owl, and she stared at us and continued to stand up and walk away. We all ran inside, and shortly after, the lights came back on. We never saw that little girl again. My grandmother had several friends who lived at that apartment complex, and no one knew who or what apartment she came from. She simply was never seen again. Lucid sleep paralysis, interdimensional being. So I was sleeping. I think I got stuck in between being asleep and being awake. I thought I woke up. I thought I was awake. I tried to get up, but I couldn't move. I've had sleep paralysis before, but this time was different. This time I was 100% conscious and lucid. I wasn't scared. I just laid there. And I just remembered thinking about how long is this going to be like this time. And so after a few minutes, I tried to get up again, and I realized that I can move my arms all over my body parts, but not. Well, imagine phantom limb syndrome, but the difference is I don't have any missing limbs. So I could move everything, but my real body wasn't moving at all. I can move all of my limbs out of my body except for my head. I cannot remove my head from the pillow like I was able to move my arms and legs out of my body. Except for my head, and I can't remove my head from the pillows like I was able to move my arms and legs out of my body. And the strangest thing out of all of this experience really is that I could see my hands when I moved them. All my real arms and hands remained motionless on my body. So I'm literally waving my arms around and I could see them, but they were transparent. Now I'm thinking, am I fucking dead? Because only when I moved and waved my arms and hands around, I can see them, but when I was still, they disappeared. They went from transparent to gone. My knees were up in the air and my feet were on the bed with the rest of my body with the blanket on me from the waist down. I had my iPad with a case that had a stand on it. It was placed on my stomach where I originally fell asleep. During all this, I grabbed my iPad and put it next to me. I felt like the case closed together in the back and I heard it close. I watched myself do it, but it felt lighter. And it was like I took the soul out of my iPad or vice versa because it was also transparent, at least when I grabbed it and placed it next to me. I did that 2 more times and my real iPad remained on my stomach. Only when I moved my hands and arms I could see them, and when I stopped they were invisible completely. So I'm laying there like 10 minutes goes by and I started to get bored, I guess, and I wanted to move my hands around again. I wanted to watch what was happening. I wanted to experiment. So I started to touch my face and it felt squishy and just weird, and the next thing I did was I interlocked my fingers like I would crack all my fingers. The moment I did that, something big crawled from my right shoulder across my body and bit onto my hand. It didn't hurt bad, but I felt it. It felt like needle teeth like a cat, and it stayed on biting into me. When it ran across my body, it's when I could see it. It was humanoid but moved like a primate. It had long, very skinny arms and ran like a monkey, like on its knees next to its shoulders like. This part happened in a matter of seconds, mind you. So when it bit down, it was for like 19 seconds, which is pretty long because I couldn't move my head. I could only move my arms, and they were only my spirit arms, you could say. I have this reminder, while I'm reading this, that it definitely wasn't a dream. I was 100% conscious and lucid. Couldn't move my physical body, though. I was thinking and looking around for 15 to 20 minutes before this happened. For some reason, I have no idea why I did this, but I reached with my other hand and I grabbed the back of its head, and it felt like short hair, like a pit bull, like a scruff of the back of a dog's neck. I saw it look at me. It had dark holes where its eyes should have been. I don't know if there were eyes there or not, because it was only for a split second and I let it go, and I watched it run behind my legs and then peek around my legs and looked at me. And then when it stopped moving, of course it disappeared, because when it moved I could see it. After that I just broke out of the paralysis and I can still feel the bite on my hand for like 15 minutes. I was so like, what the fuck just happened? Weird UFO and unexplained experience in Hatch, Utah. A few months back, my wife posted this story of our experience, but it made her uneasy, so she removed it. I, however, don't mind discussing it, and I would encourage discussion to help understand the situation. Back in August of 2023, we were staying at an Airbnb in Hatch, Utah. This place didn't have any air conditioning considering the elevation of Hatch, and the temperature was pretty comfortable. This will be relevant later. On the first night, my wife and I were out stargazing since the sky was devoid of light pollution and clouds. I had my GoPro set up and my phone taking photos. We were just staring up, enjoying the stars. That's when my wife pointed out to me what appeared to be a single small satellite floating across the sky. As we were looking at it, however, it multiplied into 3 lights in a triangle shape. It continued to expand in the same manner until there were about 7 lights in a larger triangle pattern. That in and of itself is pretty weird, but what really was just bizarre was the sky was visible within that triangle shape more or less froze like a screenshot. And then after, that section of sky was moving with the triangular, while the rest of the sky around it was stationary. The best way I can think to describe it would be like in the movie Predator, his active camo, his invisibility tech. The world behind him was visible but skewed. This triangle, in quotes, passed over the sky for a few short minutes until it just seemed to either rise rapidly and disappear or shrink rapidly. It was about that time that we noticed that it had gone eerily silent outside with us. No crickets, no anything. Even the wind seemed to stop. We decided to go in for the night after. We were both pretty weirded out. We were in awe, but definitely weirded out. I got some good pictures of the night sky, but of course, that's kind of the usual that they didn't see anything weird in them. A few hours later the same evening, when we were getting ready for bed, I wanted to try a long exposure setting I had found on my GoPro. So I was standing on the porch taking pictures. That's when I heard this whistle. Now, I'm not an overly superstitious man, but I've heard stories, and not wanting to take my chances, I didn't return the whistle. There was a second whistle shortly after the first that expedited my decision to go back inside. Weirded out, we laughed it off, locked the doors, and went to bed. Mind you, that due to the lack of air conditioning in this house, and the windows were all open for airflow. An hour or so later, after we were asleep, my wife wakes me up to ask if I heard that. It was at this point that we both hear very clearly a deep growl and breathing like that of a bear or a large animal outside our window on the porch. Not loud, but bassy. We could hear heavy footsteps on the porch as well. We woke our friends up and turned on all the lights and looked around. There were no footprints on the dusty porch and none in the soft mud around the porch. So this experience we just could not explain. Of course, our friends were asleep in their room and didn't hear a thing. And they didn't experience the earlier sighting outside either. Nothing else weird happened while we stayed there for the rest of the trip. The final thing to have happened, and this is the part that really weirded my wife out, it was a month or so later when we were back home. We were in the kitchen making dinner when she looked up and there was an owl sitting on the fence. It was just staring into the house at us. I wasn't, at least at the time, aware of the correlation between alien sightings and abductions and the sightings of owls, but I am now. To our knowledge, we didn't have, lost any events or any time or anything like that, but it just kind of felt like we saw something we weren't supposed to see, and they were checking us, seeing if we were cool. For my wife, this is all a little bit too much, and it made her just uneasy. Especially to stare at the stars anymore. I, on the other hand, am still very much intrigued. We haven't noticed any more owls as of late, so who knows if it was a coincidence or not. As I started this post stating my wife had posted before, this YouTube show called Belief Hole. It reached out to her, asked if they could feature the story, which they did in an episode back in August. The episode is Paranormal Railways, Cursed Death Cars, Diamond-Eyed Drifters, and E.T. Altercations, if you're interested in hearing her original post of the story. Plus, on their page for this episode, they showed a picture of the owl my wife sent them. I commented on the episode trying to open a discussion, but I never heard back. Possible occurrence. I enjoy hanging out in cemeteries for the peace and the nature and the weird symbolic attempt to connect with death. Nothing ever happened. No sightings, no movements in the corner of my eye, no change in temperature. Nothing. I even own a Ouija board, which mostly serves as decoration nowadays, and I've tried by myself, and with others, countless times. I never had any sort of communication. Absolutely nothing. People I've been doing, well, maybe I've been doing it wrong all this time, but really, the lack of evidence just made me decide that, yeah, ghosts or spirits don't exist. However, I've had quite an unexplained thing happen to me about 2 to 3 years ago. I've been with a couple of friends to Edinburgh, which those who know is pretty much a haunted capital in itself already. We happened to stroll through the historical cemetery, otherwise known as the most haunted cemetery in Europe, if not the world, which I've been to many times prior without any unusual activities, aside from tourists trying to spook each other. As we were heading down the slope toward the exit gate, I felt a slight push in my back. It shoved me toward the exit. For a moment, it genuinely felt like somebody nudging me with their hand, or it's a feeling that can't be replicated by anything else, really. It definitely couldn't have been my friends, as we all barely know each other at the time, and I was walking by the side of the group. They felt nothing themselves, and it could have been someone else trying to joke around since there was quite a few people visiting that place. But I figured, why would anybody want to do that to a stranger? So the chances are minimal. I've been to the cemetery countless times ever since. Nothing has ever occurred, so this experience stayed quite fresh in my mind due to the lack of explanation. What is the most paranormal experience you've ever experienced? I don't know how paranormal this is, but I definitely saw a ghost. When I was younger, maybe between 7 and 9, I'm 17 now, I went to this really old school in Toronto. My parents worked in the morning, so after school I went to daycare, which was provided by the school. The school was a regular elementary school, except for the basement. It was so strange, and it feels so vivid thinking about it. The floor is pure concrete, the walls pure concrete painted this bluish gray color. This daycare took place in the basement. The basement was like a maze. That's why we only stayed in one hallway. Our daycare was just down the hall for a boys' bathroom, and since the teachers didn't want us getting lost, the girls had to use the boys' bathroom too. When you walked into the bathroom, you were met with a wall of sinks like a barricade between two sides of the washroom. One side was meant for girls, and the other side was meant for boys. When walking to the girls' side, you could see right into the boys' side. The rule was to always go to the washroom with a buddy, but for some reason I didn't this time. I walked into the bathroom, and as I'm walking in, I peer into the boys' side, and I've never been met with such a clear ghost. An old lady with a walker walking about away from me. She had white, short, curly hair and was wearing a pink cardigan with a white top underneath and a yellow knee-length skirt. I saw her for a split second, and she disappeared. I don't know how I wasn't scared, but I carried on with my business and went back to the daycare room. Hearing someone come home, but no one is there. So when I lived at my parents' house, we had a sleigh bell tied to the door handle on the front door. It's mostly because we taught our dog to ring the bell when she needs to go outside. And for a while, our garage was full of junk. We wanted to sell all of it, so my parents would always park in the driveway and come inside through the front door. And every time that front door opened, you could hear the bells ringing. I was in my bedroom on the same floor as the entrance. In my room, I'd be watching YouTube videos, and I suddenly hear bells in the front door. Thought that was odd because my mom didn't usually get home till later in the day. Thought nothing of it, and usually after she comes inside, she sets her stuff down and then comes says hi to me. By the way, the sound of my dog ringing the bell to go outside and the door opening was very different. My dog would always gently nudge the bells. It would be like 1 or 2 light jingles. When the doors opened, they bang against the door and make a lot of noise. This sound was definitely the door opening. The house was pretty old with original wood floors. If anybody was walking through the house, you could always hear every footstep. Once I heard the bells, I realized I didn't hear any footsteps or my dog jumping for joy that somebody was home. I waited a few minutes for my mom to come say hi, and no one came. I went out of my room and into the living room where the door was, and there was no one out there. I checked the kitchen, my parents' bedroom, the bathroom, then checked downstairs. Even my dog was downstairs taking a nap. I go back upstairs confused and look at the door, and the deadbolt was still locked. The only people with the key are me, my mom, and my dad. I tried to figure out what made the bells ring so loudly, but the fact I heard no footsteps. My dog was sleeping downstairs and the door was locked still. I got kind of spooked. Can someone explain what on earth happened here? So early this morning, me, my girlfriend, her brother, were leaving to go home from a concert. The hotel that we stayed at had like a parking ramp. We were parked on the 4th floor or level. The level or floor was very small too, I should point out. When we were leaving, we started to exit as you would exit any parking ramp building. But this one, we circled around a few times instead of actually going down. Then we were like, where's the exit? And after a few more circles around, we turned around and drove the opposite way to see if we could find the exit. We still couldn't find it, even though there was a sign pointing to where an exit would be. We kept circling the level for like 10 more times, and we kept wondering where on earth this exit would be. We were just doing circles, passing the same cars every time. Then we saw a lady parked in her car, so my girlfriend got out to ask where the exit was. In my girlfriend's words, here's how the conversation went down. Girlfriend: okay, this might sound dumb. Did you just drive in here? Lady: yes. Girlfriend: I've been driving in circles and I can't find the exit. Do you know where it is? Lady: do you see the exit sign? Just make sure you stay on the right side because it's a 2-lane drive. Girlfriend: so the exit is just down there? Lady: yeah, it's just around the corner. My girlfriend said the lady seemed confused as to why she was asking where the exit was. So we went around the corner and the exit was suddenly there. The moment we saw the exit, we were just so confused and speechless as to what just happened. We went circle after circle and there was no exit anywhere. Then it suddenly appeared after asking somebody where it was. What is this? Premonition or just hallucinations? This happened 8+ years ago, yet it still bewilders me when I think about it. I live in a joint family where my family plus our other relatives live in a close vicinity to each other. I was very close to my great-grandfather as he was really sharp and it was a sweet routine. He was 93 years old at that time, and he wakes up, gets fresh, comes downstairs for some tea and snacks. I sit with him and talk with him, and we always make each other laugh. Then he goes to the ground floor and has a smoke. He smoked 5 daily since he was 40, never had any issues. One day I had a dream that I was sitting with my great-grandfather. I was having a laugh as he was telling me stories. Suddenly I felt emptiness. Closed my eyes, and when I opened them, he was not there. I got scared and woke up. I was still half asleep as it was a sudden burst of fear and anxiety, and I remember that I was sleeping on a sofa bed and I had my head east. From the northeast top corner of the house, I was getting negative vibes. I got scared and went underneath the blanket. I felt shivers and I felt that overwhelming feeling that someone is in the corner and started praying. I don't know when I fell back to sleep and I started dreaming again, but this time my great-grandfather was there and he was saying not to be afraid. He said that he's very happy. Next morning I told this to my parents and they suggested that it might be an omen for a death of the family. They've experienced that with their own other family members as well. This was the only time when my great-grandfather got very sick and he was put on bed rest. A week later he died when I went to school and I got called back home to be part of the final ceremonies. I never cried at the funeral, but I got a distinct feeling of melancholy and burst into tears remembering that dream during cremation. Now every time I think about that story, it brings joy to my heart. Afterlife visit with my grandma. When I was young, around 8, my grandma always used to tell me that she wouldn't be around forever. I always used to respond with, "Oh, Grandma, don't say that. Yeah, you will. But if you do go, you better visit me in a dream." She passed when I was 22. When I was 27, and I'm currently 39, I dreamt that my family was taking a vacation to a special spot where people could go visit their loved ones who had crossed over. It was some neutral zone for the realm of the living and dead to reunite, located somewhere in the southwestern United States. If I were to guess, it would probably be New Mexico, but I'm uncertain. The geographical landscape reminded me a lot of northern Argentina, but I know it wasn't that far. It seems pretty far out, but it was like a completely normal, everyday place in my dream world. My family and I arrived at the hostel. We checked in, and the entire ground floor reminded me of one of those cottagecore family diners. An aesthetic that's 100% my grandma, but sort of with a hotel feel. There were other families sitting in the booth talking. We made small talk with some of the people about the whole process since we were, first-timers. They informed us of some of the rules. We could only visit one at a time, and it had to be in a specific place. We went upstairs and unpacked our luggage. We all sat down and tried to figure out who would go visit first. They all volunteered me to go first, since I was the oldest grandchild. I obliged and went downstairs to the pre-visit counselor. It was required that you spoke with the counselor before visiting to go over all the rules. The rules were as follows. Once you walk out the door, turn to the left and follow the path until you get to the bench. Wait at the bench until your loved one arrives. Stay on the path and don't leave the path. No more than 1 hour per visit. I questioned the reasoning behind some of the rules, but I was surprised they weren't more strict. I signed the disclosure stating that I had gone over the rules and proceeded to walk out the door. The scenery outside the hostel was very surreal. It looked like a ghost town, literally, I suppose. And sort of what I could only describe as the most beautiful, majestic sunset that I'd ever seen. I turned to the left as I was instructed, and I saw a grassy field with a paved winding path and a huge, lonely, dead tree in the background. I must say that it was very stereotypical. I approached the bench and sat on it to wait for my grandma. When she appeared, she looked kind of like the version of her that I remember. She wasn't a ghost or glowing or anything like that. She didn't act 100% like her spunky, sassy self, though. She was more somber and serious, with semi-vacant eyes that lacked life and personality, for lack of a better way to describe them. She looked at me, grabbed my hand, and said, "Let's go." We proceeded to walk down the path toward the tree in silence as I gathered my thoughts and tried to figure out where to even begin. I started the conversation by profusely apologizing. I apologized for how moody and apathetic I was shortly before she died. I apologized for forgetting her Frosty at Wendy's. I apologized for so many little things that had happened during the last few months leading up to her death. For context, my grandma and I had always been close when I was younger and did many things together. I would visit her for what seems like every weekend. We would go bowling, go out to eat, and visit all the little stores in the small town that she lived in. When I became a teenager, and all through my 20s, I really sucked in all aspects of life. But that's a story for another time, because this is going to be long enough. After I finished crying and apologizing to her, she looked down at me and told me that she understood and not to beat myself up. She paused for a moment and then asked me if I had any questions for her. Of course, the first thing I asked her was what the afterlife was like. She looked at me and told me, "Well, it's not what you think it is. There are no pearly gates, nor angels or anything like we're told. It's more like the life that we experienced before, but different. I don't know how to explain it, but it's not what you think." I sort of understood what she meant, but not really. I then said, "So it's not like heaven or hell? Are the consequences for our actions like there are consequences for our actions in this life?" She then proceeded to tell me how every action that we do here while alive, on Earth, it's quantified with either a positive or negative amount, depending on how good or bad the action is. At the end of our life, we all have a score that determines the outcome of our afterlife and what it will be like. I tried to wrap my mind around what she had said because it simultaneously made perfect sense and blew my mind. Can't remember what else we talked about, but the end of the path led back to the front door of the hostel. We said our goodbyes and I gave her a big hug, but was still left feeling sad and empty while walking toward the entrance. As soon as I walked through the door, I woke up. I don't know if any of you reading this have ever seen the series The Good Place, but I tripped out after watching it and seeing their version of the afterlife. Doug Forset's mushroom trip and prediction was exactly what my grandma described. The Good Place didn't come out until 2016, which was about 4 or 5 years after I had that dream. I'll never be sure if she actually did come to visit me. Took her long enough. Or if it was all in my head. Who knows? It's pretty crazy either way. Ouija board experience. Object shows appears out of nowhere. So me and a couple of friends decided it would be a good idea, it wasn't, to go use a Ouija board in my dad's doctor's office, which was built in the 1800s. I had heard there was a lot of history behind it, and could possibly be haunted. So anyway, it was about 8 p.m. and just turned dark. We decided to start using a Ouija board. We started by asking simple questions like how old he was before he passed, his name, and some other random ones. He seemed super chill at first, and I think he even cracked a joke at one point. But I swear it was out of nowhere where he told us, "Evil spirits are here, and help me." Obviously, a very intense turn of events. Me and my friend started to become super worried and got scared and wanted to stop. So we tried saying goodbye and took a long time to say it back, which worried us. But once he did, we decided we were done with this stupid idea. Went to go turn the lights back on, and then I swear to God, a random pill dropped out of thin air. We all went silent and my heart was racing. We immediately left the room, and after I went back to look up the number that was on the pill, came to find out that it was an allergy pill which my father doesn't even take or anybody else who works there, which is only like 3 other people. Plus, it wasn't even allergy season. and I asked everybody if they had one or threw one in the air before the lights turned on, but both of them said no, which I definitely believe because I trust them a lot, especially considering how scared everybody was. It would have been no time to try to prank someone or joke, but I just wanted to share this experience and wanted to know if anybody else had had an experience of the same kind. You know, when an entity or spirit made a random object just show up out of thin air. I keep dreaming about my dad who died 4 years ago, and I'm starting to believe it's him. To begin with dreams, it was just us going to the beach and stuff. Or it would be silly things like we'd be at the zoo and he'd be there and just not doing much. But recently, it's felt a lot more real. He's been saying things to me like, I love you and I miss you. I never used to believe in this stuff or that it really could be him, but it's all started to feel a lot more real. And now I'm starting to believe it's him reaching out to me. I don't know if I find it comforting, maybe a bit, but honestly, it's starting to make it hard to fall asleep. I guess I'm just worried, which I know is a weird reaction to have, but I also don't think it can be explained. I spoke to a parapsychologist about some of the unexplained stuff. She said that it wasn't her job to tell people if it's real or not if they believe they saw their dad, which is fair. But I also feel really strange. It's like a strange circular thing where I keep thinking, well, it must be him because I'm reacting this weird way and there's no reason for it to feel like this if it's just a dream. If that makes any kind of sense to anyone. My grandpa didn't know he was dead. About 10 or so months ago, my grandfather died. It was a sudden death that resulted in a car crash. He never knew what happened. About 2 weeks or so later, I had a dream. He was sitting at his kitchen table, saw me, and asked, "KaffeDreamer, where am I? What's going on?" I looked at him and said, "You died." He responded with, "Oh, okay." He didn't really seem too surprised by the news. He went on to say that he keeps seeing this white light and that he doesn't know what it is, but that it keeps calling to him. I told him that it's a good place where his brother and mother are, that it's peaceful and full of love, that they're waiting for him and would very much like to see him again. Then I told him in a very important way that it was his choice. He didn't have to go and could wait as long as he wanted. He thought about it for a moment and said he was going to wait a while. I cried and he started to make himself a comfortable home. Then I woke up. I truly believe I got to communicate with him after he died and that he needed me to tell him that he had died. Something is trying to communicate with me, unsure what to do. I've never had a paranormal experience in my life until last week. We went to New Orleans, went on a ghost tour, used some equipment, joined in half-hearted seance. We also visited several voodoo places. I didn't feel anything at the time, but started to feel weird at the hotel with chills all over my body and my stomach tightening. I became super fascinated and got addicted to a ghost app for several days, mostly because it's so interesting and I'm trying to figure out how it all works. But it has also shown some intelligent answers that were pretty startling and some scary ones. Then I started doing more research. Realized I had started this whole encounter pretty recklessly, like trying to communicate when I'm drunk or not thinking about my safety. Since I realized this may be more dangerous than I thought, I completely stopped using the app and I've been ignoring things. and also completely stopped talking about it with my few friends. The idea being to not give it attention and it'll lose interest. So, should I try to communicate and see what they want, and then do a cleanse of my house myself? Or should I just go ahead and try to clear out all this energy, delete the app, cleanse the house, etc.? Where do I even start? My experience. So all the way back in 2009, I was 17 in North Dakota. I was completely by myself one random night around 9 p.m. playing Wii. That's when I noticed a shady corner in my peripheral vision, where the two walls and the ceiling meet. At the corner appeared extra dark to me even though the light was on. I literally thought to myself, that corner looks extra shady. Immediately followed by, what does that even mean? What a stupid thought. What I'm about to say sounds corny, but this is just 100% what I experienced. I looked straight ahead, back to my Wii after thinking that's a stupid thought, and I heard the deepest imaginable voice say, "Get out now." Except I didn't hear it like you hear your friend in the same room talk. It's as if it was in my ear. Absolutely zero way to tell where it came from. Ran outside, convinced myself it was nothing, and tried to go to bed. My room was in the basement, and the lights wouldn't work unless the upstairs lights were on. Dad didn't like that. So I walked all the way back to the corner of the basement, opened the metal sliding door leading to my room, and laid under the covers with zero light. Then I proceeded to hear the deepest growl imaginable. But this time I could tell it was over my feet. Ran outside again, proceeded to fall asleep outside, wake up to the sun. The day I woke up, I asked my dad if I could go home early. He tried to throw a punch at me, and I was gone within 24 hours, to which I don't remember a second of. Never told my family, basically nobody until recently. That's my story. I know it sounds corny at parts, believe me or not, but it's what I experienced. Whether some other outside factors caused this, I'll never know. Just curious what y'all think, and maybe somebody's experienced something similar. Ghosts in my uni library. So I have this particular study spot in my uni library that I sometimes study at. It's sort of in a more secluded area where usually not many people study at. To give you a visual picture, it's in front of a wall, so all I see is the wall in front of me. And then next to me are more desks and chairs. I normally only go there when the library's pretty full and I can't find another spot. Last time I was studying, I saw from the corner of my eye someone standing there, but I didn't think much of it since it's a library. I thought somebody just stood there and was looking at the books. This person, however, stood there for so long and I felt like their body was facing me. They were maybe looking at me, but I couldn't really tell because it was the corner of my eye. So I eventually just turned to my right, but to my surprise, no one was there. I wasn't freaked out. I genuinely was confused as to why there was no one there. You know how you sometimes just feel the presence of someone? This happened to me a couple of times after that. That's where I thought somebody was walking by, and I was so sure of it, but I brushed it off saying that my mind was playing tricks on me after I saw the first quote-unquote person. Today I went to the library to study again. I sat at a different spot. Strangely, all of my electronic devices suddenly stopped working. They were working earlier. My phone suddenly had no reception for 10 minutes straight. My laptop just had a blank screen. My iPad was saying every website I tried to visit was dangerous. It's never happened to me before, and I got really frustrated, went to change my study spot. I was walking around for ages even though the library was pretty empty, and I somehow ended up at that spot. Settled down, and suddenly everything started working again. So I continue studying, and the same thing happens again. I'm so sure that someone is standing there. I look to my right, and no one was there, and to demonstrate how clearly I could see these people from the corner of my eye, at some point a real human was standing there. My mind played it off as, yeah, these are the things you keep seeing. And after I look, it's a real human. I think it's strange how this only happens at this particular spot. I've never experienced anything like this before. What are your thoughts that this could be? Childhood ghost experience in a haunted dance school, Halifax. Last night I was watching It, the movie, and it got me thinking about ghosts and paranormal shit. I'm bored, so I'm going to share this one story I have. I'd say majority of people I've told about my experience don't believe it, but I know what I saw. I'm 16 years old now, and this happened to me when I was like 7 or 8. Really didn't think much of it then, but it blows my mind now. Basically, there's this dance school where I live. My elder sister did dance there, and I always waited outside of the class with my mom waiting for her to finish. I always just kind of fooled around like any kid does and would explore or look around. Anyway, before I go deeper into the experience, I want to give some background on the actual building and some history. Where I live in Halifax, it's in Canada, there was a major event called the Halifax Explosion where 2 ships collided and blew up in a bunch of TNT or something. Think it was. Won't go into that, but long story short, they buried hundreds of the bodies where the dance school is now. It's called the Maritime Conservatory of Performing Arts. That probably explains why the place feels so creepy and eerie, and probably explains this experience I had. So basically, here it is. I was running around doing whatever, and for some reason I went over to this door. It was a locked door to this closet office type of a room, and for some reason I looked through the little keyhole. I was able to see inside. Inside it was pitch black, really small, and the only light in there was one of those landline phones. It was on a desk, and I could see like a filing cabinet and a desk chair. I am 100% certain that there wasn't anybody in there. And when I say 100% sure, I mean 110% sure. Some say 120. But anyway, as I kept looking into the room, all of a sudden the doorknob jerked to the right and then back into place, as if someone was trying to open it. It startled me and I just stepped back, but somehow my little self wasn't scared. Didn't think much of it. But also that building is old as shit. Ain't no way they had some futuristic door or something. There seems to be zero explanation for it. I'm also not one of those ghost lovers. I'm even a Christian. I doubt most stories I hear, but I'm telling you, this has really made me think about ghosts and paranormal activity. I've told so many people this story for the past few years, and every time I think of it, I think like, what the fuck? Anyway, I'm so bored and thought I'd put this out there. Also, if anybody has any info on this or could explain a bit, I'd love to hear. Haunted apartment. Said family member of mine, B, moved to an apartment with their boyfriend, Carl. Ever since they started living there, they had an odd feeling about the place. Both B and Carl claimed that one of the rooms in the flat was overwhelmingly cold. This was in one of the hottest cities in Europe, mind you. This will become relevant later. One night, Carl was alone in the flat. He reported hearing voices that sounded terrified. When inspecting the place, he looked past a mirror in a cold room, and there he saw a girl in a white gown. She said something to him, but I don't recall exactly what it was. It was along the lines of, "Please don't hurt me." Obviously, he started freaking out, called B to tell her to come home. When she did, he told her what he'd seen. Although she was creeped out, she brushed it off. A few months later, one of B's dearest friends came to visit along with her boyfriend, Steve. Steve was a self-proclaimed medium, although B had no knowledge of this at the time. They had a few coffees in the living room and all was well. Out of nowhere, Steve turned pale white. He seemed very out of it and couldn't keep up with the conversation the way that he'd been doing just a few moments earlier, and his eyes fixed on a corner of B's living room. B noticed his change of demeanor and, worried that she might have said something wrong, asked him what was up. Steve was very adamant about not telling her, saying it was nothing and that she shouldn't worry. She's quite hospitable and doesn't like people feeling uncomfortable in her home, so she asked a few more questions along the lines of, "Don't you like the coffee?" After a bit of interrogation, Steve caved in. He explained that he's a medium and he's got a bit of a history of seeing ghosts. Then he began describing what he saw. A small girl in a white gown. He said she looked very scared, but not scary. B was, to say the least, shocked. The description fit perfectly with what Carl had seen, of which Steve had no knowledge. There were more weird occurrences, like gusts of wind on very warm days, and again, this city is like asphyxiating in the summer, and that's putting it lightly. Cold spots, voices, footsteps, all the faucets turning on at once, etc. At some point, B and Carl decided that they couldn't take it anymore and moved out. They even broke their lease in a bad situation economically. Basically, they couldn't have been more desperate about leaving. Going to share my experiences soon, plus disembodied voice story. When I was a kid, I seemed to be plagued by paranormal occurrences. Been wanting to get these off my chest for a while. It's a long story that happened almost 25 years ago, so I need time to get the details organized, but the gist of it is me and my best friend and neighbor were plagued by a poltergeist for most of the summer of 2001. But not to make this post completely pointless, I will share a shirt experience I had. When I was 17, I dropped out of school, got a job, and rented a tiny shoebox-size efficiency apartment. The walls were thin, so I'd hear the neighbors most of the time. One night I was chilling by myself. I honestly don't remember what I was doing, but it was quiet. No television, music, video games, or background noise of any kind. It was around 12 or 1, and out of nowhere I heard a voice loudly and clearly half shout a quick, "Hey!" It sounded like it was coming from directly in front of me, as if I were having a face-to-face conversation with someone. It was so abrupt and clear it didn't have that muffled quality of hearing neighbors through thin walls. I ended up spending the rest of the night sitting outside on a staircase, not entering again until the sun came up. That was the only experience I had in that place, although I have had weird experiences in almost every place I've lived, from sleep paralysis to unexplained noises, and even figures and things touching me. We'll post poltergeist stories soon, as well as a few others like it happened during my 11th birthday party camping in the woods, but I recently heard somewhere most people don't report their paranormal or unexplained experiences, and it got me thinking, maybe most people did share what they witnessed. Maybe we could possibly have a better understanding of what causes these things to happen.